Man, there was real daylight between Microsoft and our competition in the 90s. There was Microsoft and there was competition, but it is not like today where you have whatever the 7-8 companies plus pretty much in any given day, anybody can come from anywhere.
How did it feel like when you were on top for a long time and then you kind of had like a spell in between when you were kind of wandering in the desert?
I do think success brings with it the challenges of success because you start forgetting what made you successful. And everybody who joined and rode the wave thinks they are the cause of success versus saying, no, we rode the wave and we now need to refound. And that, I think, is the undoing of at least large, successful companies.
You've had two great CEOs before yourself, Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer. What is a contrarian leadership belief you hold that you think our founders here should consider?
That's a good one. So I would say
I have not seen such an excited audience at SBC, and we host a lot of people. Woohoo! We are honored to have you, Satya, here. You obviously need no introductions, but here at SBC, we explore the -1 to 0 phase, where a lot of us wander through the desert until we build conviction on how we want to spend the next 5 to 10 years of our lives and what we want to work on. So in that spirit, you've had a meteoric rise at Microsoft. It feels, at least from afar, that at every turn you've had to challenge, just challenge everything. So we want to visit the pivotal moments of your career and discuss what -1 looked like in those times.
So Satya, I'm going to start off this whirlwind -1 journey. Hello, everyone. Good to see you all out there. Okay. So we're going to rewind back to 33 years ago when you joined Microsoft. What was it like to interview at Microsoft in 1992? Why did you decide to interview there instead of interviewing with startups? Like, what was that experience like? And I can tell you my experience interviewing with Windows NT kernel team in 2003. Did not get the job, by the way.
I also did not get the job at Microsoft.
First of all, it's fantastic to be with both of you and with all of you folks. I mean, this -1 to 0 is a great sort of framing. 33 years ago, it's interesting. I was actually working at Sun. So the first job I had after grad school was in Mountain View. And I went actually to what was a developer conference at Moscone, in fact, in 1991, when NT was first talked about, and Win32 was first talked about. And for some sort of reason, I sort of got into my head, which I think it's a little bit of ex post, words to it, but was x86 was going to win. And it is just, this is when these platform shifts sort of become sometimes inevitable. They take a lot of time, but they become inevitable. And that was the thing that got me to say, God, Sun, pound for pound, was just a stunning company. I mean, in terms of everybody else who went on to create all the great companies, if you think about the core of the distributed systems, Sun was a full stack systems company. We made our own chips. We had our own operating system. We had our own, in fact, I spent a bunch of time doing, interestingly enough, knowledge worker tools at Sun. But I just felt like x86 was going to win. And that's what got me to go to Microsoft and say, I was not a Windows user. I was not, I never thought much of DOS. But I felt like this is the company that is going to be able to capitalize on that. But more importantly, truly be that democratizing force, which I think is an often used word in our world. But that was what got me there and kept me there for 33 years.
But I mean, Satya, the question still is: was the interview intense? Because I bet a lot of people in this room have maybe interviewed at Microsoft at one point. It's
The
notorious.
interview was one of those classic Microsoft at that time, man. I tell you, the interviewing nowadays is a little better, right? At least you got to sort of do your lead code or whatever, as opposed to that thing was go on the blackboard and the whiteboard and then do your thing. And I remember that, and somehow I got through it. But the last interview question, which I've written about, which was the worst, is we had something called the as appropriate. So if you make it, and that's the one person's name, it's never in the sheet, except you show up in their office at the very end. And then that means you probably are making it. And this guy's last question to me, well, I'll never forget, right? So he says, hey, I have a question for you. You're crossing the street and a baby falls. What are you going to do? And I said, man, this is like some algorithm that I didn't study. Is it like, what is this? P equals NP, whatever. And so I say, I'll call 911. So he gets up and he walks me out of the door. And he says, you know what you should do when a baby falls? You should pick them up and hug them. I said, there's no chance. I'm going to make it. But lo and behold, you kind of learn from your life's experiences.
That's amazing. It's interesting. Microsoft is one of those companies that I think has just played such an important part in the story of technology that when people bring it up today, it means many different things to many different people, right? But I think one of the stories that at least gets lost today is that in the 90s, Microsoft built, it kind of built a diverse set of technology that was just like leading across almost like all of the diverse kind of classes. I'm sure, elements of that culture remain today as well in different forms, but how would you describe the culture of Microsoft?
That's a great point. In fact, we're going to turn 50 as a company on April 4th. And
this year.
Yeah, this year. And so we've been sort of, talking a lot about it and what exactly is it. In fact, one of the things that the metaphor or the idea that Bill had was Bill and Paul they were building a software factory. That's kind of the concept was. You remember there was no software industry before Microsoft, and so they just wanted to be wanted to build a company that built software, and they didn't have this is the category. So they went, in some sense, first was, let's build the basic interpreter for the Altair, right? So that was the best place to start. We actually had, Flight Sim predates Windows for sure. It's one of the oldest products we have. And so, in some sense, they went to wherever you could use the software factory to create software. So in an interesting way, I kind of think of, and that's what even led to knowledge work, right? And so I think the culture was, how do you get the best talent to build the best software factory that then creates the software products that are needed in the world? That's what, when I go back, I think somewhere in that framing for all of you all as founders, I think it was a pretty powerful, helpful thing when I look back in our 50 years. Because I think a lot of companies, sometimes when you fall in love with the one product, the one technology, the one business model, it sort of kind of all things run out of gas at some point. And so I wonder, I'm not definitive about it, but I wonder whether that framing, whether it's to your point about culture, that's when you kind of think about the talent that comes in is trying to be accretive to the software factory. Each time you can take a fresh look when there's a better idea of some new widget you want to build in the factory you go versus just be in love with the widget you built last year. I wonder whether that has been actually helpful in keeping, because I don't think of a culture as something, all of us have been striving and always strive for a learning culture. Nowadays, I use these words of growth mindset and what have you. And I wonder whether we always had that growth mindset and a learning mindset because of the fundamental framing of the company.
Is that something that you would talk about, like kind of the software factories? Was that lingo?
No, it is not. Like I grew up in a Microsoft. We talked about it as a software company. It's more in the context of our 50th year where I'm sort of saying, like, for example, like after all, we are now yet in another big shift. What does it mean to be a software factory at a time where there is intelligence? Or this agentic world of ours, what does it mean to even say you're a software factory? I think how do I reinterpret this? So I think that's kind of a little bit of the language I'm searching for, and I'm trying to revisit our history to make it current. Because I do think a lot about, longevity by itself is not sort of a goal, right? Relevance is. And therefore, what is it that gives you the courage to be relevant tomorrow? That's the thing that I'm trying to kind of really study, learn, push myself, and even articulate for myself.
So on the subject of relevance then, to maybe take you through some of Microsoft's like middle years, if you will. Maybe to ask the question in a most controversial way, how did it feel like when you were on top for a long time, maybe for like, let's say 25 years, and then you kind of had like a spell in between from like, let's say, I'll just say 2000 until 2010, when you were kind of wandering in the desert. So what was that like? Like when you're kind of you're kind of like winning everything, and then you're kind of not winning for a while. Like how did the culture in the company, like how did you deal with it personally? I'm curious.
Two sort of couple of different reactions. So the first is, man, there was real daylight between Microsoft and our competition in the 90s, right? I mean, I look at, especially in the late 90s, there was Microsoft and there was competition, but it is not like today, right? Where you have whatever the 7-8 companies plus pretty much in any given day, anybody can come from anywhere, like as OpenAI has even demonstrated to sort of create what is a generational company. It's pretty unbelievable to see the vibrancy today. So I do think a little bit of, sort of success brings with it the challenges of success, which is you kind of forget what made you successful. And so I do think in the 2000s, I think it's not like we didn't have ideas, nor did we start things. I think I always say that you miss stuff because you're too much in love with sort of what you have today or your business model of today and are not willing to go somewhere which is inconvenient, or just don't have a complete thought. Right. One of the things that Steve Ballmer, would always, one of the greatest pieces of advice I ever got was he used to have this, like, you got to have a complete thought, right? Even myself, the number of us, we have some product idea. The beauty of founders, successful founders, is they have complete thoughts by definition, because otherwise you're not going to be a successful founder. And in companies, that's what you need. You need lots of refounders who have complete thoughts from time to time. You just can't say, I've fallen in love with this one piece of technology and I've not thought about go-to-market, or I've thought about go-to-market, but I have no idea what the product should be or what have you. So to me, I think the culturally relearning, like here's another thing, right? There was a new generation of leaders who needed to go through that and become refounders. Is how I think about it, right? So in some sense, the most dangerous times are when you feel like you're very successful, because you start forgetting what made you successful. And everybody who joined and rode the wave thinks they are the cause of success, versus saying, no, we rode the wave and we now need to refound. And that, I think, is the undoing of at least large successful companies.
now that you kind of have painted it in that way, I think one of the things to Microsoft's great credit, you've never been shy at taking shots on goal. I mean, we met, I think, in 2006 when I was working on Facebook search and Satya was running Bing search. And I would fly up to Seattle once a month to see, how do we get Facebook search results to kind of show up in, Bing search.
We
tried so hard. It was so, like, how do we personalize it? How do we kind of enable kind of Facebook data to show up in Bing? But the thing that I always, what I remember from those meetings was, like, from the inside in, like, Microsoft was like, you were willing to learn. You were willing to try it out. And it was, despite being a big company, we could actually make progress, which had surprised me at that point. So, I mean, Microsoft took a lot of shots on goal during that time. And I think that's to your credit.
Yeah, I mean, as a company, I think we've had definitely that ability to persist with things. Sometimes stubbornly persist, perhaps. And quite frankly, you have to, right? I think in tech in particular, you got to take shots on goal and just get the reality is the network effects of tech are unforgiving, right? I mean, they're great when you get them, and they're terrible when you're on the wrong side of them. But therefore, you have to take shots on goal as probably the way to stay relevant.
I mean, I love it. I mean, this is what we tell founders on kind of like day -1. But I think it's amazing to see it apply even at the largest scale, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, I think to a founder community like this, the good news for you all is, people like me, look, I really do believe this. I don't think there's any franchise value in tech. It absolutely is, in that sense, a pretty scary industry because, at least if you measure it by relevance, you may have franchise value in terms of EPS or something because you can always be a thing. But if you sort of say, no, you want to be relevant, you do need to actually build something that is not just keeping up, but it's about sort of inventing, and that then is what I think by the fundamental bias of this industry is. There is always going to be a disruptor.
I kind of time Microsoft as a comeback kid with you becoming CEO, quite honestly. And, again, like, I thought it was just going to disappear and become one of those, like, old tech giants that move slowly. And then when you became CEO, things started to turn around. And you've talked about the culture of reinventing, refounding, also really spoke about being relevant. Take us back to your -1 days of becoming CEO. Like, what was the first thing you did to make that turnaround happen?
Yeah, I mean, for a couple of things. One is, I think, first of all, I give a lot of credit to, and in fact, all the credit for what happened in the cloud era to not me, but to Steve, because after all, I worked for him. I worked in that company. He was the one, quite frankly, in fact, a lot of what I learned on how to be an effective CEO is actually from Steve Ballmer, watching him give me permission as a direct report to go spend the money even when the street was not giving permission, right? That's what a real CEO does, which is it's sort of defy conventional wisdom and to be able to empower leaders and people inside the organization. So in some sense, Steve is fine. He doesn't care. He's done well with MSFT, but that ability to lead is sort of what I picked up, sort of working for Steve and then observing Bill. The thing that I'd say for us, perhaps, Ruchi, to your fundamental question, though, is I was very grounded in that I was the first non-founder, right? Steve technically was not a founder, but he had founder status in the company. There was no, it was like a company that Bill and Steve ran that I grew up in. So to me, the lucky break, perhaps, is I came into that seat knowing that I just can't go in and, try and fill his shoes, right? So I had to, as I describe it as a mere mortal CEO, in some sense, now I have better language thanks to Reid Hoffman, this refounding language. But that refounder mindset I had, which is I said, okay, I got to take and make first class again things that founders take for granted, right? Like, the founder, because of their...
We call it founding moral authority.
Yeah, that's right. And so the mission is implicit, right? Culture is implicit. Somehow, follow the founder. There's so much that goes with it. And so to me, regrounding the company in its mission, right? Going back to even Aditya's question on, hey, what was the software factory? Like that, I went back and say, when I joined the company, we used to talk about our mission as a PC in every home and every desk. And quite frankly, by the end of the 90s, at least in the developed world, we achieved it. Yeah. And since then, we were a little confused. What the heck is our mission? Should we just shut shop, give the money back to the shareholders, or what do we do? So going back and saying, no, when we what was the thing behind the basic interpreter for the Altair? It was about putting software in the hands of others so that they can create more software. I said if that was relevant in 1975, in 2014, when I became CEO, it was going to be more relevant. And so I went back to that and said it's about empowering people and organizations. So the other thing that I felt Microsoft got was institutions people want to build. Right? That's kind of another very unique thing, which is organizations are also things that people want to build and that need to, in many cases, outlast them. And so we want to build software for those organizations as well. So people and organizations, people ask me, are you a consumer company? Are you a commercial company? We're a software company that wants to serve and empower people and organizations. So in any event, the long answer to your question is regrounding on mission, creating this language around our culture with growth mindset. Thank God for Carol Dweck's work. That was super helpful to me because it was not considered new dogma from a new CEO, but it is work in child psychology that appealed to people. Those two things is what I would say helped me a lot galvanize the energy to go execute on a lot of the strategies were very consistent. If you look back, it's not like I was running one of the largest groups in the company before I became CEO. The strategy, I've written the same stuff. I was talking the same stuff before. It's just nobody paid attention to it. It's that after becoming CEO, somehow things happened a lot faster.
On that note, again, you've had two great CEOs before yourself, Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer. But what is a contrarian leadership belief you hold that you think our founders here should consider?
That's a good one. So I would say the one contrarian leadership, one of the things about I don't know whether it's a founder thing, but a lot of leaders have it, right? Which is, everything was broken before, and so therefore I rescued it. I'm very suspect of that. Anybody who comes in and says everything was broken and I saved the day, make you sound, make you feel better. So I kind of look at it and say if the place falls apart after you leave, then you've built nothing. So in some sense, even as a CEO, I kind of look at it and say, it's the fourth CEO, the fifth CEO of Microsoft and their success. That will be the true story of whether I did my job or not.
That's pretty great. I'm going to switch tacks a little bit, just go off script a little bit. I would say Microsoft has benefited not just from innovation from its research lab, but also actually its investments in startups. I remember in 2007, the deal team came to Facebook's offices. Aditya and I were there. Maybe Sol, you were there too. We were hanging out on the engineering floor. They show up at 8 p.m. All of us were really into electronic music. So we had these amazing DJ decks with speakers and, the music was pounding. We were coding. They all got so excited that they decided to pull an all-nighter, which we were doing every night, by the way. And then they camped out in the conference room right there and they ironed out the deal terms. And then lo and behold, by the end of that week, they invested $240 million in Facebook in 2007, which was huge. And then more recently, you invest in OpenAI, Mistral, there's so many other AI companies. I think this is particularly relevant for the audience here. how do startups think about partnering with Microsoft? How should they pitch your fund, which is M12? I mean, it's such a large organization. It's intimidating to us from the outside. So we just don't know how to think about you.
I mean, you have a crazy good track record.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And it's not often spoken about in terms of like Microsoft's investments and I think collaboration with the startup ecosystem.
Yeah, no, first of all, I think the collaboration with the startup ecosystem and what we're trying to do even with M12, those are super important to us. But we're not an investor. So in other words, quite honestly, at Facebook, we wanted to invest, not that it happened, but we wanted to invest because of what we thought could be a commercial relationship around advertising at that time, right? Which you were smart enough to not do with us, and you built your own, and the rest is history. But that was the strategic intent. The intent was not an investment return, but it was about say, hey, can we in fact be a sponsor at that time of Facebook in order to be able to make some commercial advance in an area that we were interested in? OpenAI is slightly different, right? I mean, OpenAI, you got to remember, at least when we started backing them, they were a research lab. And then as OpenAI has evolved, they've become a successful product company and what have you. We've kept up, quite frankly, with Sam and his team and his leadership team's ambition because we wanted to make sure we were supportive of someone who was a partner that we were an investor in, but more importantly, a commercial partner. And so I would say OpenAI has evolved from where we started. But I come at it from saying, look, as one thing that I'm grounded on is Microsoft's two things. Right? It's a platform company and it's a partner company. A platform is not stable without partners. And if you don't have partners, you can't be a platform, right? So that type of, that is when I think about startups or even for that matter, other successful companies. I always am looking for, I worked in my early days at Microsoft. I even worked with, on our database business, with folks like SAP, for example. So we were able to build our relational database, SQL, underneath SAP. That's the type of partnerships that are super good. Same thing with OpenAI or Wintel is another one. So to me, I always gravitate towards what are long-term stable sort of win-win constructs between a platform company and another partner, and who themselves can be building their own platforms.
You're obviously comfortable doubling down on your investment in OpenAI. But given I guess the folks that you view as competitors, whether it's like Google or like Meta, et cetera, who have their own foundation models, don't you feel a little, I guess,
left out?
Yeah. Don't you want your own foundation model?
It's like, the old quote from back in the day,
I'd feel left out. I'd be like,
real people have fabs, I think that real companies have foundation models nowadays.
The way I think about it is, right, I think we're a full stack systems company and we want to have full stack systems capability, and foundation models are an important thing. But the way when we initially started with OpenAI, it was a sort of a bet on the conviction that at that time, obviously Sam and Ilya and Greg and others had on basically scaling laws, right? In fact, it was interesting. I think it was Dario who wrote the paper that I first read, which was the scaling laws paper. And that was the bet I placed was, and especially as it met natural language. I don't think if it was now I have a much better appreciation of even RL, but I don't think we would have done what we did if it was not natural language. Because of being a knowledge worker company, we were obsessed about not natural language. That was Bill's thing all the years. And so when somebody said, I'm going to throw compute on natural language and maybe we could have some scaling laws that could just give, because the thing we were obsessed for 1,000 years was schematize the world, right? Which is people, places, things, go build the greatest ontology and schema, and that's the way intelligence will emerge. We kind of took many, many detours on that. And then I felt like, wow, I always felt uncomfortable because the world is too messy for SQL to work. And so I said, someone somewhere is going to figure out how to get to some semantic thing in a different way. And this was the bet. It was unclear to me whether it would work or not, but it started working. And so I look at that and say, we have a fantastic commercial partnership. We have all the things that we want and need, the ability, like I've always said, like we've built a system underneath it, we've built tools around it, we're building products about it. So to some degree, I have a long-term stable relationship with OpenAI, and we have the IP rights. And so therefore, we will want to build, like we built 5, Mustafa and team have capability that they had in Pi before, we have it in Microsoft. And at this point, if you wanted to just to prove out, that doesn't make sense. I do believe the models are getting commoditized. In fact, OpenAI is not a model company. It's a product company that happens to have fantastic models at this point, and which is great for them and great for us as, both partners of theirs. And so I want to go now where I think the industry structure that's emerging, models by themselves are not sufficient, but having a full system stack and great successful products, those are the 2 places.
Maybe now focusing a little bit on the future.
Yeah.
And kind of the set of things that we're building on top of these capabilities. It's amazing that in the 2.5 years since ChatGPT kind of really, I would say, entered the public consciousness, there's just been an incredible flurry of, just a tsunami of activity, between chips, data centers, like frameworks, foundation models, vertical AI companies, consumer hardware, consumer software, agentic software, modern enterprise software. There's just so much going on. And you have a vantage point, I think, to a lot of those different aspects. If you had to zoom out, Satya, and kind of tell a lot of the aspiring founders in this room, what might be 2 areas that are overlooked today? That might be like, interesting kind of arcs that are interesting places to, essentially like maybe place your seed in over for like the next 5 years?
I would say there are 3 clear things that I think people here and all of us are dabbling in, and they're all happening in parallel, and it's exciting to see, right? It's no longer just what's happening with knowledge workers or language models themselves, but it's also what's happening in the real world and the real world action models, and then these models for science, whether it's chemistry or biology. All 3, there's some transfer between them, but they're also got sort of independence. I think that's a fascinating thing to be, quote unquote, going after. The thing that perhaps I've been now going back a little bit, even thinking about it even as a hyperscaler, is what's the system architecture that truly will support this new. If I look back at it, right, Paul Maritz was one of the guys who used to work at Microsoft, and growing up in the system side, for me, it was always about, hey, can you anticipate what the workload is and then redesign the system underneath? I don't think we have done a first principles re-architecture of the system. I mean, we've fallen in love with these AI accelerators. We threw a lot of them into existing data centers and said, go forth and prosper. And we've done quite a bit of it. But I think time's come to say, hey, what is the next generation hyper-converged infrastructure? How should I think about compute storage and the AI accelerator together? What is these distributed synchronous training jobs with sort of now RL, auto grading? How should you think of that system? That I think is the overlooked part. Even on the data center, when people say data center is a computer, is the time come for V2 of it? That's one. And then the other one is this client. People talk about hybrid AI, but we've not cracked. Like the model architecture itself, we talked a little bit about it. I'm surprised that there isn't a distributed model architecture at runtime, not for distributed training, right? At runtime, why is it that I can't split between whatever is running on my 45 TOPS NPU on my Copilot PC and the cloud, like those, because you can run a bunch of helper functions and so on and so forth, but is there a way to even think about foundationally? I'm assuming there has to be a model architecture and / math breakthrough for that. So those are things that I'm surprised actually, because the open source community has gone. I mean, what DeepSeek has done is tremendous work, and in general, what open source is doing in making things more efficient on existing infrastructure is great. But I wonder why no one's cracked the existing infrastructure includes a lot of flops on the edge. So that's the one overlooked place.
It's interesting. I mean, coming back to what you said earlier, there are very few people who are, in some ways, actually having a complete thought around kind of like how do these AI systems work. And it feels as though everybody is kind of building small parts, but there isn't that much of an overarching kind of like architecture or a complete thought yet.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. And the other one that we talked a little bit about is even in these AI systems, right? When I look at even underneath Copilot, whether it's GitHub Copilot or the Copilot we have in Knowledge Worker, it's not yet a complete system, right? So it's not like, I sort of think it's not yet had if you say this is the new computer, it's not had the stored program moment yet. In other words, there is no architecture, like there's no memory system that is robust, that is multi-model. The tools used is a little too artisanal, at least right now. And so somehow those would be the two other places. But by the way, there's a lot of great work happening on all of this. Right. So that's why I do feel this is a little more very early innings to building more robust AI systems side. And so at least I go there, and I think this is where it was fantastic to see the number of people who are doing not only foundation models, but systems companies that are, it's great to see that.
So when thinking about a complete system, I like to think about, where do I want to be like 5 years from now? Or like, what do I imagine the future as? So if you were to define true agentic behavior, whatever that means to you, but beyond the world of copilots, what would that look like?
That's a great one.
And how would it impact your day-to-day? Because I like to start from there and then move down the stack.
Yeah, it's a great one. I've been thinking a lot about it, right? I mean, if somebody had said to me pre-PC that what I would be doing is mostly in life for 33 years at Microsoft, be a typist, it would have felt like, what? No way, right? Computers are going to change my life. They're going to be like unbelievable. And except what I do is get up in the morning and start typing and then hopefully get to some sleep in the night. So I wonder whether what I'll be doing is triaging my agent inbox. Because even in an agentic world, that's why I'm really obsessed about even Copilot as the UI for AI, because even the more I delegate, at some point, if we don't have some AI takeoff problem, then it is aligned and it's controlled. It's coming back to me. It's notifying me, hopefully better quality notifications than the ones we have today, and getting permissions, getting instructions, helping me with what I want. And so to some degree, there is going to be a UI layer that allows me to then have massive, massive leverage, right? So I kind of think about like two metaphors. In the consumer life, I would like, hey, a friend, a coach, an advisor type of AI. And then at work, I would love to have a chief of staff, a researcher, a consultant, working with me on everything I do. And so I think that that's what would be my relationship with AI, and hopefully the drudgery of knowledge work. In fact, one of the other things I go back to is I think we conflate knowledge work and knowledge worker. I think tomorrow there will be a knowledge worker, except the knowledge work they'll be doing, it'll be at a different level of abstraction. And so that's what I think we're all trying to build. Like I think about like if Word, Excel, PowerPoint were the tools for knowledge workers in the 90s, what are those tools? Copilots were sort of version 1s of it. Version 2s are Copilot plus agent. What's the version 3? And I think that's what we're trying to contemplate.
I think my 8-year-old and my 4-year-old think I'm a professional emailer because I wake up and I write emails, and I go to bed and I write emails before going to bed.
There you go.
I was just going to ask, what do you think
UI.
the interface, what does the UI look like? Because I feel like the chatbot, even the Copilot, they're lacking. They're unimaginative. They don't really tie everything together.
I agree with you on that, right? So that's why this multimodal interface, like one of my favorite things to do is this Copilot voice interface for me, which is I've even set it up to say my action button on the iPhone with CarPlay. Man, like it's like even take podcasts. The best way for me to consume podcasts is not to actually go listen to it, but to have a conversation with the transcript on my commute using my Copilot. Like who'd have thought like that, but it is more convenient because of the modality, the fact that I can speak to it, I can interrupt it. I mean, think about it, right? This full duplex conversation, which was never possible. That is a fantastic sort of new modality, which I think there's no going back, right? It's kind of like, it's like auto-suggest. There's no going back anymore.
I think that a Bill Gates quote, Bill G quote that is timeless is, people overestimate progress in 1 year, underestimate it in 10. I think a corollary of that as a startup founder is getting to be really good at understanding where in that 1 to 10 year time frame you are for a particular piece of technology. So when I look at a lot of the pretty cool announcements that you had for quantum computing that you talked about, I think just last week, when you look at this, like, is that ready for like the startup ecosystem to be thinking about doing something with it? Because it feels more like in the 1 month in the, or like it still feels very early. Or am I just misunderstanding that?
There are a couple of things on quantum. I mean, like for us, it speaks back to a little bit of our ability to go persist for a long time. I'm like the third CEO who's been funding quantum.
Over the last 50 years.
20, yeah, at least we've been at it for 20 years, 20 plus years. And it's sort of a fascinating journey because we picked, it goes back a little bit to having that framing of what is it that you want to get done right. Because from day one, we decided, and that is, I think, Bill and at that time a guy called Craig Mundy and team sort of decided that, look, we want to build a real utility scale quantum computer. And in order to build utility scale quantum computers, you kind of need stable qubits. And in order to build stable qubits, you need to have like a physics breakthrough. So they went down this thing called these Majorana particles and said, hey, we were going to go find the existence proof. Some guy in the 1930s theorized that such quantum sort of phenomena exists, and it is never proven out. And so 20 years later, we now have proven the existence of it. And not only that, we've been able to fabricate those atom at a time to be able to show that these Majorana zero states can in fact hide quantum information in a robust way. So error correction needs are less. And so therefore you can scale it up into a real chip and what have
Pretty
you.
incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible to see where we are. So therefore, today, it's a lot easier for me to fund quantum than it was even in 2014 because of this breakthrough. And we've had a couple of false starts there. And to be able to persist through even that has just been phenomenal to see the team go through. But I think the one thing that I've also come to realize is we do need quantum, but it's not like as sometimes people think of, I think quantum as somehow replacing classical. I actually think classical plus quantum is a very powerful, like in fact, take that atom by atom construction. If we had a quantum computer, that would have been a lot faster, right? Because our ability to simulate nature goes to a different plane if you had a quantum computer. But quantum computers are not that great. They're great at the exploration of a data space, but they're not a data-heavy workload computer. So I think both of these have a place. That's one. And even for the science models, for example, you can use quantum to generate the labeled data, essentially, to train models, which then you run as regular AI models on an HPC or what have you, right? So therefore, I think there's a lot of this coexistence of these two. And to your point, I do feel for those who are in those, let's say that third thing that we talked about in science, in chemistry, in biology, I think there is real reason why you want to pay attention to what's happening in quantum, because even with 10 logical qubits, 100 logical qubits, you could use things out of it in order to be able to build better chemistry models, better biology models. And that's sort of where we are even with Azure Quantum. And that's why I think you even see the market a bit react to, like in an interesting way, like biopharma. People are even going public. I'm glad about that. People are willing to invest in quantum. It's just a little more like in that phase, which is good to see for even leading edge deep science.
I guess we have to talk about the multiverse theory. I mean, we just have to. It basically suggests that quantum events indicate the existence of many parallel universes. Do you believe in the multiverse theory?
Yeah, the Copenhagen consensus is a little more me than I think multiverse, but it's kind of like, man, like let the physicists duke it out. Let me stay out of it.
It's like, I'm just going to build a software factory.
What about the philosopher in you?
I exist, so there must be something I've observed, and let me leave it at that. That is measured. And I think that's a reasonable place to be.
Satya, you're an incredible father, and you're obviously, very close to your family. One of the things that I think a lot about, I have 3 young children, is that I think that by the time they're all kind of entering, kind of the workforce, like in 10 years, the world is going to probably look pretty different. I don't know if you'll have AGI or something, but it's going to look very different in terms of what it would mean to be, I think, a productive member of society, the work that they might have to do on a day-to-day basis. So I'm curious, what advice would you give us to raise our children for that future?
Yeah, I mean, it's great. I mean, one of the things that I heard about, like, what does agency look like going forward, I think is the real question. I think we're all grappling with, does this increase human agency? Does it somehow take away because we're subject to someone else's decisions or what have you? It's a fascinating thing. So I'll come at it 2 ways, right? One of the most profound moments I ever had in terms of the AI demos, one was when I first saw the early versions of GitHub Copilot and said, oh man, this thing works. Because software program, believe me, I mean, it's like the toughest thing was to convince any software developer that this thing is any good, right? So, but the demo that did the most for me was I was in India, I would say in 22, I think, early January. And I saw someone showed me a demo they had put together by basically daisy chaining, I think at that time, maybe 3.5, GPT 3.5, with sort of India has this, unbelievable sort of stack of digital public goods. So there's text to speech, speech to text is all available as a sort of a public good that somebody took and put together a WhatsApp bot that a rural Indian farmer was able to just go ask the bot to say, hey, find out about this subsidy program I heard about on television. And it comes back and says, go to this website, fill out these forms, and you should do it. And then he says, I don't know what a form is, and I don't know what a website is. Do it for me. And it started. It says, talk about this is 3.5. And the fact that, so what dawned on me is, think about the agency. This is a rural Indian farmer who gets something developed in the West Coast of the United States, like a few months before, thanks to the ingenuity of this place and some programmers in India putting in their hands a technology that suddenly, because this is a person, who's absolutely has agency, except has no access. And suddenly you've changed access, right? That is another way to think about our children, I think, which is what would they do if they really have with them now the ability to code anything they want, research anything they want, build anything they want. Is there so in some sense, would we put premium a lot more on curiosity than expertise even? I think that's kind of perhaps one of the more interesting things is, will we educate, think about the confidence, right? You guys are, you actually cracked IIT, I failed the IIT. And so think about it. right? It's like, hey, it doesn't matter one exam, right? Go and think about like how would you be able to give confidence to every kid out there that they can go explore anything. And that's at least the optimist in me. There are a lot of other scenarios here, but I think the core curiosity and critical thinking are still going to be perhaps at a premium, and somewhere coupled in it is probably confidence.
I love that answer because I think that I'm a pretty confident person. So, I'm going to, I think impart that to my children. But to maybe even more so, kind of like that, like, hey, these computers and this intelligence, it works for you, right? Like, what can you make with it, right? Like, what will you make? And I think that's incredibly empowering. I love that answer. But Satya, you're clearly very competitive. Microsoft is also a competitive and winning culture. How do you channel that outside of work? Maybe in your cricket team?
Yeah, that's it. I was happy to see today's morning match, but I'm obsessed, as I think every other South Asian is with cricket. But I think the interesting thing that I've been thinking a lot about is talking about competition, at least at this stage of my life, and is I want to make sure that I'm thinking about the game that is being played versus playing the game, and being a lot more deliberate about it. I feel founders by definition are doing that because that's how you define a company and you say, what's the game that I want to play? But like competition is sort of really challenging yourself first to be in the right competitive set. That's another unbelievable thing in the tech industry, right? Which is, if I look at it, we've been lucky enough. Like, here's my story is I came to the United States in 88. The Berlin Wall fell in 89. I entered the tech industry in 1990. And man, what a ride. It's an unbelievable time. And so the question is, and that's just luck, right? And so the question is, what is the setup and the competitive set? That is the most important thing, is that what I've realized, right? Which is you want to be in the sector, in a space with competitors who are awesome.
Yeah.
In fact, that is better than being in some place where you may be a winner, but you're not really. And so therefore, I kind of have gotten a little more orientation on thinking about the game that is being played, or playing the game versus the game you want to play.
Just as what a time to be alive
Yeah.
as a computer programmer and to be in the arena of like the greatest game, I think, of our time. It's a gift. We are running a bit behind, so we, I think, have to wrap up here. Ruchi, do you have any final things you'd like to say?
I have no final things, but want to thank you so much for coming out. It's been inspirational to watch you. It's been absolutely amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
That was another episode of -1 from the team at South Park Commons. Make sure to subscribe to our show wherever you listen to podcasts and find us on social at South Park Commons. And thanks to our friends at Atomic Growth for their support in bringing this episode to life.